Hello, and welcome back to Wyvern-Hearted Ink and Friends. Today, I am going to be discussing why I hate limited color palettes. Limited color palettes are the bane of my existence. I hate them with all my guts because every time I try to do one, it looks terrible, and I don't understand why. But I do understand why. It's because I was taught about color differently than most people, most artists are. And so I kind of wanted to talk about why limited color palettes are a good thing for the art community, why they can be frustrating, and also why they are relied on way too much. So first, don't get me wrong, limited color palettes are actually a really great thing. And they help a lot of artists, and they can come out beautifully, especially if the person using the limited color palette knows what they're doing. So limited color palettes are meant to be more dynamic than something that has full color, because it's meant to put emphasis on certain aspects of an image, or it is being used to simplify things so that you are drawn more to specific colors or specific actions going on in an illustration. It can be really great, especially for artists who aren't confident in a lot of color yet. I know a lot of artists are really afraid of color, and I really hope that you learn throughout this not to be so afraid of color, but I totally understand. I know most people are afraid of color, and that is perfectly okay. Lastly, limited color palettes can be extremely challenging for people like myself who are used to using a lot of color, who are used to going through the whole gamut of color to create a piece. There are a couple of reasons that I personally really dislike doing limited color palettes. I love how they look when other people do them, but I personally hate them for myself. With all the pieces that I've tried to do limited color palettes in, I've never liked how any of them have ever turned out. And, you know, that's definitely a weakness on my part of being an artist and not being able to make something that I enjoy with a limited color palette. But I think you will see why when you're watching this video and watching me go through this older piece. So this piece I made about a year and a half, 2 years ago. It was just something that my mom said, hey, here's a canvas, here's some acrylic paints that I have at our house currently. Here, use these, make this piece based on this old portrait of a man. And it was from one of her art books. It was like a classic art piece that I was just supposed to redo in these colors that she gave me, right? So, she only gave me 4 colors, I think. It was a teal, a red, and an orange, or like a yellowy skin tone color, and I think maybe a brown. And that's all I had to use to create the original piece. I was doing it based off of that old painting that I used as reference, and I wasn't trying to use any of my own ideas or style for how I created the piece. I just tried to mimic what was there originally, and I think that's part of the reason that I kind of hate how it turned out. The only thing that I enjoyed was the background, and that is literally because I came up with the background. The background was not there in the original piece. I just made it up as I went, and I really liked the scaling of it, and it made the piece feel a little more dynamic and a little more interesting. So after it was hanging on my wall for the last 2 years, I was finally sick of it, and I finally had more acrylics to use. So I decided that that is what I was going to work on for this week. Back to why personally I just like using limited color palettes. So one of the main reasons is that it makes me feel less creative. And I really wish that I didn't feel this way. I kind of hate that like my brain really dislikes that challenge, because challenge can be really good for your creativity, but it has to be the right kind of challenge. And I think because I am so reliant on being able to use every color in the rainbow, that I find this challenge really frustrating, because there are certain colors that I want to use. Caveat to this, I think that if I chose from pre-made palettes and went off of the palette to try and make a piece, I think I could do that. And I think maybe in a future video I will try doing that, just to show you guys that it can work and that I can enjoy it. I'm going to challenge myself to enjoy it. But I think that's part of the reason that I have so much trouble with it personally, because I learned about color in a very different way than most people do. Add on to my last point, usually people, when they are picking a limited color palette, don't know what colors go well together, don't know what colors would mesh well, and so you end up with a really odd palette that doesn't flow and can be really hard to work with. And I think that's part of my problem a lot of the time, is that I just get given whatever is available to try and work from, and oftentimes those colors are not necessarily good together, they don't really mesh well, and it can be incredibly difficult to work with. So, like I said before, I learned about color in a very different way from most artists, and that is because my mom is an artist. She got her degree in fine arts, and she specifically was very focused on anatomy. She really loved, she had some old books where she was looking at the skeletal shape of people, animals, all the muscle, all the tendon, and she really, when she was teaching me about color and how to use it, she often talked about how there was every color within anything that you looked at. Every time you looked at something, there were so many undertones and highlights and all these little reflections, and every color could be seen in any image that you looked at if you just looked at it the right way. And specifically, I think she kind of went about talking about this a lot with skin tones, because skin tones are notorious for being very difficult to paint, and the reason is mainly because we are not one color. Our skin tone is not one color, and it is made up of many colors based on our veins, the shape of our skin, the shape of our bodies. There are so many aspects that play into why we look a certain color, and they are not necessarily indicative of anything, and you can't really use one color to paint a person. While this was taught to me as just how to paint skin tones in particular, I use this for every day with every single thing that I paint. I paint a lot of different stuff, and I always think about how I could use every single color. Now, one of the things that you have to remember is if you're going to use any color, you have to put it in at least 3 or more places. You cannot use any of your colors and only put it in one place. And that is that is how you get rainbows to work for you. If you are going to use all the colors within the rainbow, you have to put them everywhere. You can't put them in a single place because it looks incredibly unnatural, and it feels like the scope of your image is wrong. So what I mean by that is, have you ever played a video game or read a book or watched a movie where there's magic, right? In certain scenarios, in certain systems, the magic system doesn't make sense for the scope of the world. Because you're like, why would X, Y, and Z not be fixed within the world? Because if everyone has this ability, or if these people have this power, why aren't they using it to the extent that they could? And why haven't they fixed all these issues, right? Or why is magic so limited for this person but not for that person? And how are people harnessing this if like this person is struggling so much with it? When you create a fantasy or any sort of story, any sort of system, whenever you are creating a system, all the laws within that system have to make sense to each other. And in the same way, when you are creating an image, all of the colors have to make sense with one another. They have to correlate. They have to have a order or spectrum to them, right? In order to encapsulate your entire image or your entire scene, you have to have the colors spread throughout. So specifically for this image, not only did I not enjoy the color palette, but I also didn't enjoy the subject matter. I don't really paint men very often, but if I do, it's usually someone who is very interesting to me. And this man was very plain, very bland. He didn't have a lot of interest or a lot of character to him. He was very bulbous and vague in shape, and just not very interesting to me personally. I'm sure lots of people enjoyed it. I'm sure that, like, you know, some people were sad that I painted over it, but personally, it was a very boring piece to me. So I wanted to add some flavor, add some zing to it. I adore making pieces of characters that have piercings, that have interesting features on their face, that have elf ears, that have horns or whatever. And so I took all those interesting aspects that I really wanted in this character. If I'm going to create a piece, right, I want it to be beautiful. I want it to be interesting. I want it to have character. And I think that a lot of people are afraid of that, and it is to the detriment of their own art that they do not leap into the things that they love to see themselves, because I think you would enjoy your art so much more if you did that. At least personally, I know it works for me, so that's why I say that. Anyways, I hope you enjoy the process of this video, and I hope you enjoyed hanging out with me, learning a little bit more about how art can be used, how palettes can be used, and how color theory is a very interesting and large beast to tackle in any art field. Anyways, I will see you guys later. Thanks so much. Please like and subscribe if you are interested in seeing more of this kind of content in the future, and I will see you later.